presentation, Diasporic Images of Africa. That's what DIA stands for. And of course, my name is Charles Trott. This month, Asian and Pacific Islander History Month 2019, we are focusing on India and India's African connection. I have a co-host, yes, a friend, Rumu Dasgupta. I'll let her introduce herself, and we'll be just sort of leading the discussion because it's a small group. You know, if you have a comment, I mean that I pose a particular question and she responds. If you have something to say, please, now's the time. Okay. We're going to, I gave everyone a handout. You can go over the vocabulary, I call it vocabulary list. It familiarizes you with some of the vocabulary, words, phrases, names that are in the display case and will be in the slide presentation. We'll go over them afterward, but you can take some time in the next couple of minutes. And as we go through it, because some of the answers are actually here. If you remember from the days of school, you pay attention to the film strip, movie, you get answers in here, some of them.
Right.
Okay. Please.
Thank you, Charles. It's always a pleasure to be here at Asbury Park Library. Rumu Dasgupta, I taught at Georgian Court University forever and ever and ever until I retired 2 years ago, and really enjoying my life now, causing trouble. As this knows, we have been in places, making trouble of the right kind here and there. But I mainly just, take care of my grandson. I try to write once in a while. For the Asbury Park Press, you might have read some of my opinion pieces over there. I mainly write about homelessness or the immigration situation of that. So I'm very happy to share whatever I am able to offer in terms of India's African connection. And Charles and I, we have been talking about it. So I think we might be able to present a really vibrant discussion on this.
Yes, we're going to work from antiquity to modernity and everything in between. It will be, as you know me, I go all over the place. I'll try to stay centered and balanced and stick to the script. What I'm going to do right now is the usual. Let's look at the slide presentation to sort of set the tone for this. Does anything stand out to anyone? You don't even have to go in order. First of all, out of these 10 names, do you see anything that looks familiar to you? Okay, all right. Oh, I'm glad to know we have a learned crowd. Very good. Good. All right, so let me see. What do we have? Well, yeah, I tell you what, huh? What did you say?
Kush is a slang term or something.
Push? No. Let's go into it anyway. Push is a fragrance.
Yes.
An oil, a fragrant oil.
Tamil stood out to me because I do drumming and I've seen that word before.
Which one?
Tamil?
No.
Number two.
All right.
Did I say the wrong thing?
Yeah. No. Good.
Is that
All
how I
right.
say it usually?
Let's start with number 1. CD. Who are these CD? Used to be a guy around the neighborhood, a black fellow like me. We used to call him CD, but it wasn't spelled like this. S-E-E-D-Y. This is a particular, well, anyone know the answer to the first one?
What's the question?
Oh,
Which one of these things?
number 1, yes. Which one is number 1?
Oh, you're right. I see.
Which did you get a sheet? Did you get a sheet?
No. No, I was talking about the video. Did y'all we already?
Oh, yeah.
How long is that?
Where's the clock? It's like 7 and change, 7 minutes.
Oh, 7 minutes?
Oh, all right, CD. Anyone?
I didn't say that out loud.
All right, I'm going to give you the answer because I'm going to say some of this. I'm going to go partly through it and then, well, no, I'm going to go all through it. CD. No one knows. So, F. Look at F. African slaves and freemen brought to India, also known as the Habshi. They have a number of names, but that was one that I found. Let me check with my. Are you?
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay.
No.
All right. I have to find them. I know you
Find
can go by everything you find on the internet. I understand. You know. But I did a little bit of checking and it seemed to. Actually, there's a CD project by a group that is talking about this same ethnic group in India. All right. Number 2.
Is that similar to the way they were brought to America?
No.
No, well, only in, you're talking about the CD, right?
Yeah, the African slaves.
Yeah. Only in the sense that some of them were enslaved, captured, just like people out of West Africa. These were people out of East Africa. They were captured for a while by Arabs, later Portuguese, and I don't know, it might have been another European group. Not all of them were enslaved, and their movement, once they got into Indian, the country of India, their movement as a whole was similar to the United States, but unlike the United States, some of them were the one that became free men, or perhaps free women as well, but free people. The ones that were enslaved, it was more of a, from what I was reading, more of an indentured servitude. They did not go to the next generation. The ones when we were brought over here from mostly West Africa, it went on generation after generation after generation. According to what I have read, it didn't go on for generations. The impoverishment and the exclusion from society because they wound up being basically of an untouchable class. So in that sense, it has some similarity, but it's not quite the same. Number 2.
Yeah.
Number 2 is not to be
G.
confused with number 10.
It's G,
2
right?
is, let's see. Yes, it is. Descendants of Dravidian people living in Southeast Asia. That's number 2.
And Tamil is also a language.
It's also language. Right. Yes. And it's also the name of one of the states, right?
Tamil Nadu.
Right.
Tamil Nadu is one of the states.
Right. Number 3, Kushite. Okay, you Christians, get on it. No, let me stop. I don't want to. But you know, that term plagued me for years. I had to grow into just about an old man before I knew what a Cushite was. I saw it in the Bible. I said, nobody ever told me that was an African people. But anyway, now I'm giving the answer away. Anyone know? I'm looking at H, India's term for Ethiopians. Right. Because Kush was basically in the area of Western Ethiopia and Eastern Sudan. It's also sometimes Nubia was interchanged with that. Number 4, Indus Kush. Well, Indus should give you a clue. I just told you who the Kushites were. So, negative dots.
J.
Was it I?
It's I. Oh, wait a minute. Which one are we doing? 4? Yeah.
Cool.
Shit.
In
Right. India's name in its earliest history. The Indus River runs through Pakistan, actually. And Kush being the Kushites, who were later called Dravidians and now the East African period. Sikhism, number 5.
D.
D, monotheistic religion created in 15th century Punjab, India. 6, the Mughals.
J.
No.
Nope.
No.
It's
The Mongols, are they people?
It's E. It is a people, but it's E.
Oh.
They were a Muslim dynasty that ruled much of India in the 1500s. As a matter of fact, I showed you one of the, who's the emperor of the empire, I guess.
you know, the Taj Mahal? The
No.
Taj Mahal, no.
Not that one. Shoka.
Okay, so I got
Is it Shoka? Anyway, let me not go too deep. I've forgotten it already. I think it was Shoka. Yeah. They pronounce it S-O-K-A or spell it S-O-K. Shoka, he was the emperor of the, well, no, he was actually an emperor of the Mauryan.
So for the Mughals, the kings were different: Babur, Humayun, Akbar, Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal.
Right.
Some of the Mughal kings built the Taj Mahal.
Okay.
And actually the last Mughal king was still around when the British came.
Really?
Right?
Wow. That's a
And
long
he was deposed finally in 1857.
Mm. So that,
So it's not just about 100 years before he died.
so
We
that,
still have the Mughal.
that dynasty lasted for about 400
The-
years.
Oh yeah, it started, exactly, and they were the ones who really unified.
Right. All right, so where are we? All right. let's
Number
move-
7.
Number 7,
J.
Dravidians. Right. The earliest peoples created a city and culture in ancient India, now modern day Pakistan. Number 8, Harappa.
Drum beat.
It does sound very rhythmic. Number 8 is C, one of the earliest cities and mother cultures of India. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are 2 different cities in modern day Pakistan, and they are the ones that are best documented anyway. Number 9, Baloo Nachiyar.
A.
Yes, it is. First queen to battle the British and Persians of the 1700s. And we might as well do the last one.
B for drum.
Not to be confused with Tom. Yes, right.
Thank you.
No problem. Another word for drum. And, well, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Now, let me sit my silly self down for a minute. Yes, go ahead.
So there were already different groups of people in India and then people came over from Africa and did they ever join together or were they always just separate groups of people?
We all are the descendants of everybody, of all of them. So in my own family,
Yeah.
you can see people who are as fair as, white people, and as dark as the African. So because there has been so
So
much
it's total
intermarriage,
mixing,
mixing
okay.
and all of that. And actually also Mongolian from the east. So there has been a lot of, intermarriage and interracial mixing in India. And actually, Africans probably came to India with the first, transition, when Africans first moved out of Africa, they actually came all along the shoreline
If you
to
turn
come
to
to India.
the last page.
All
it's
along
on
the
the
shoreline.
It's a map.
So it's once the journey of man started in Africa,
Yes.
they came, and so much of the, original people of India are from Africa. And actually there is a wonderful documentary. It's called The Journey of Man. Journey of Man. It's a fabulous documentary. It's not by National Geographic, but by a very well-renowned anthropologist. And it's a Journey of Man. Now I'm forgetting his name.
Netflix or someplace?
You might be able to get it on Netflix, but it was shown on PBS.
Oh, okay.
Just maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I used it in my classes all the time. Journey of Man, and that's where you see the people coming
So
from Africa.
this is a map of today, right?
Right.
Right.
Because some of these places might have been more connected, right?
Interconnected.
So
Right.
they didn't have to travel by sea necessarily to get over, right?
The Pangaea, for example. Pangaea was a connect where all of that was connected.
What was that, over a million years ago or so. But even the rise and fall of the water creates passages that we don't see today.
Right.
There are islands not far off.
This is
There's
not that
one
very,
in
it's not very
particular off
See
the
the
Ark.
Yeah.
They say there's an island, well, it was an island, and it was a city. It's submerged now off the western coast, I believe, of India. But India and what we now call Sri Lanka,
Right.
formerly Ceylon, that little island. If you go back
Right, right.
10, 12,000 years ago, they didn't have to take a boat like they do today.
Right.
It was landmass.
Yes,
And it
the
extended.
seas are rising.
Right, so even though I give you.
It was closer, that's what.
Right, and easier to get to. But I showed you the map there and here and gave you the map because if you look at it, just think about this map for a minute. If we're talking about people coming out of East Africa, not even West Africa, not even Central Africa, East Africa, you're on the Horn. This is the Horn. Don't it look like a rhinoceros horn?
Yes.
See it up there? Okay. Well, it's not hard to, even if you did there was no land, you would take a little boat, jump over here, take another little boat, jump over here, and we follow the land on down.
Right.
It's an easy process.
Connection at first.
There were
People walked
Right.
from one place.
Right, they could walk, and once again, the Kush area, or the Kushites were in this area here, Ethiopia and Eastern Sudan. So they're right here. We're not talking about people from over here. Okay? And this old map, someone was throwing it out some 30 years ago, and it was one square piece, but it's gotten further deteriorated. I loved it because even Stevie Wonder could tell the mountains over here. I don't think you could probably buy one of these now, but it would be a lot of money. This is probably from the 50s because I see the homie in here, Nyasa land. There's no Nyasa. Maybe a man. The homie, Benin, and some other old man. Oh, United Arab Republic. Egypt, stop it. Anyway, maps are important, and you know how I am. I apologize for not having any visual art like I usually have, other than the digital slideshow, maps, and some photos. That's the way it went this month.
But we have lots of stories.
Yes, we did.
One of the ways in which I demonstrate my connection to Africa. Well, every time I travel to Kenya a lot, Kenya and Tanzania, because I have students who graduated from Georgian Court who teach there. So they invite me all the time. And when I have to go to Nairobi, I don't go from here. I go to India and then go to Nairobi. From Bombay to Nairobi, it's just maybe 3-4 hours. So it's, just to show how close, how connected it is. So it's much easier for me to go that way than to go from here. So anybody who wants to go to Africa, first come and visit India, and then take few hours plane ride.
You've got to be much closer on that, I can see that.
And when we were talking about this, I told Charles one of the stories which demonstrates that connection even more. Of course, many, in the First World War, for example, Indians were fighting with the British. Britain recruited Indians to fight. Well, most of them, of course, went to Europe. They were fighting in Belgium and in France. But most of East Africa was then under the Germans. It was their East German Empire. That's where the Germans were. So there was a war in Tanzania called the Battle of Tanga. That's another thing you can look up, Battle of Tanga, where these Indians came in a British ships which they had never ridden before, given food that they were never used to, crossing waters that they were forbidden to cross by their religion. That's another story. But they were brought over there and to fight in a place in the marshlands which they were not used to. So imagine, and who was Germany putting up to fight? Kenyans and Ethiopians. So it was Indians fighting East Africans for a war in which they had nothing to give.
This sounds very familiar.
Yes.
They had nothing to give.
Yes, would be the story.
But Indians, of course, were not fighting very well, so they were called monkeys by their commanders. They were twittering around like monkeys. That's what it said. But so it started then, and of course, Indians have been moving to. Do you want me to continue talking? Okay. So both of us are never at loss of words. So then, of course, Indians were brought to Kenya and to South Africa as coolies to work in the plantations. It was the reverse trade. Not as slaves, but as coolies. But they came, they brought their families. So there are so many Indians in Kenya and Tanzania, Nigeria, and of course South Africa. And again, in Kenya, so much of the businesses are led by the same caste of people to which Mahatma Gandhi belonged to, because that's the business class. So one of the stories that I told Charles the first time we met about this India-Africa connection, of course, when I went there, the people around me were speaking Kikuyu or Swahili. Kikuyu is, of course, the language of the Kikuyu tribe, which is the predominant tribe in Kenya. But other times, they were speaking Swahili. Swahili is, the language everybody speaks. But it is a mishmash of Arabic, Urdu, Hindi, and Bantu languages. So they were saying things which I could understand because they were throwing in words. And most of the time they were not talking smack about me. And so, I would catch on, for example, they would say something about keys. I knew because they said chabi, and chabi is an Indian word. I said, somebody lost keys? And they said, how do you know? So they would talk about dunya, which is earth. I said, you're talking about earth? So there were so many words in the language they were speaking. Because Swahili is a businessman's language. So everybody who wanted to do business.
But that's mostly in East Africa.
Mostly in East Africa, right. And so I saw just this last story, I saw these Maasai people walking around with their flowing robes, and I told Sister Wanjiru, who is a teacher, that I want a robe like that, to flow in the wind. So she said, when we go to Tanzania, we'll buy it from Arusha.
Wow.
So we went to Arusha, and I said, I have to get my Maasai robe. She said, okay, I'll take you to the shop. So we went to a shop, and there were Maasai people spilling out of this shop. They were all buying their clothes over there. When I went in, there was an Indian guy who was the shopkeeper, who was speaking to the Maasai in their language. And so, of course, I started speaking to him in our language. And then I asked him, what brings you here? He says, my grandfather came here. And when he came here, the lion were walking around outside. So, of course, I bought my Maasai robe. And so the Maasai helped me buy it from this Indian shopkeeper. And the Maasai showed me how to wear it. And they tied the knot, which I still haven't taken off. So that's my story of my Africa.
Did the Indian merchant say anything to you once he saw you?
He wasn't, it was nothing very strange for him, because Indian people are there all over.
Right, so you didn't know.
I was more surprised than he was.
Right.
Because he saw, and so many of the words they use, like medicine store is dawai dukan, which is exactly the words that we use for a medicine shop in my hometown. Dawai dukan. Dukan means shop, dawai means medicine. So I said, oh, you buy medicine over here? So Sister Wanjiru would say, how did you know that? So, just to show you the connections.
Wow.
The connections.
Since you're talking about that, I want to ask you about the music.
The music.
The classical Indian music.
Right.
And then you have classical Arabic or Arab music. To the untutored ear, like my own, I can hear a tune, I can tell if you're out of tune, but I hear a similarity. I know it's different instruments. One of the classics from most of us are almost the same age. You all do remember, well, some of the songs. But at any rate, you remember Ravi Shankar, right? Okay. He played the sitar. This is one of the classic, is it?
Yeah. The sitar is, one of the most
Miles Davis.
unique.
Miles Davis incorporated that into his music.
Well, later on, yeah.
Indian music,
Yeah.
that is not mentioned.
And Ravi came over in the 70s. Ravi, as I remember it, I think it was in the 70s, he was like Miriam Makeba, who introduced African, primarily South African music to America. Ravi came over and introduced Indian music. There may have been someone before him, but it didn't go over as big. That's all I'm going to say.
His music, probably.
The
Was
Beatles
there a connection
was-
to Miles Davis? Miles Davis, he had a connection to him?
Well, other than perhaps they worked together with Miles, But his daughter, that's when you saw the name Shankar up there, that is one of his daughters.
Anushka Shankar.
Anushka, yeah, she plays sitar after her father and the whole thing.
Well, I heard a lot of 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And if you focus on that, it takes you into another realm of understanding and hearing the music. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
I don't know.
I started digging.
You were there, remember?
Yeah.
You played, he was here.
I don't know if it's always in 3s. That
particular piece.
Yeah, that particular one.
Yeah,
Right.
And
And what's funny is I had another piece of music that was done by a woman, Yasmin Levy. She sings in Spanish. I don't know if she's from Spain, but she too did a thing that was in 3. It was just before the song, but I said, she's Spanish, we can't, you know, we don't need you this month, you know.
Well, so much of the Indian music came with the Mughals. You know, especially northern music. You know, in India we have 2 separate classical music schools. One is the northern Indian classical and the southern Indian classical. And though there are many similarities, but they are distinctly different.
Okay.
There is and the northern Indian classical music was most definitely, you know, influenced by the Mughals. And so there is a lot of connection with the Arab, with the Persian, with, you know, North African.
And Islam.
And Islam. Oh yeah, absolutely. The Islam. Not just the music, the dancing. The dancing also is very much influenced by that. And the Southern has its own distinct origins.
It seems like we always have this north-south demarcation and culturally as well as physically and well, what did I say? Most of the darker people, well, not only me, but it seems so. Tamil Nadu is in the southern portion of India, the southeastern portion of India. Right. True. The Tamil are down, well, Tamil Nadu. There are Tamil people. The state just was named after these people. Also Sri Lanka and the Nicobar and Andaman Islands, although they're off to the east, they are south.
Andaman and Nicobar Islands.
That's part of India.
Yeah, this is all part of India. But you remember when the tsunami came, this is the part which was really affected very badly.
Wow.
Yeah. But a lot of them, they were able to save themselves because, you know, they have their native, you know, knowledge which has been passed on about, you know, how to, so they went up to the hills, they followed the animals because the animals were all going up, so they went up with them and saved themselves. But some of the slides there were from the people, you know, this part, so distinctly African. But you would think that, you know, these probably were places where during that journey of mankind, you know, people came here and settled. But I just want to say something about caste. Caste, you know, India, caste, everybody knows. There are 4 castes and then there are untouchables and all of that. But the word caste in Sanskrit, which is the Latin of India, is Varna. Varna, V-A-R-N-A. And guess what the word Varna means? Take a guess. Depending on the basis of what Charles has been telling you about North and South and the distinction in the... So what... Another word for pigment?
Mulatto, or color.
Color. Color. Varna means color. Varna means color. And you'll see all the upper caste people are lighter skinned. People who are in the subsidiary classes are darker skinned. So even though in India you really can't distinguish between people, not in terms, we do have the binary in this country, black, white. Even though there are lots of people who look white are black, lots of people who look black who are white, you know. Of course, you know, that's another discussion. But in India you can't really make that distinction. So people have to look at the last names. The last names signify caste.
Now speaking of that, if you take the last syllable of your name, Gupta, she's Das Gupta. Want to explain it?
Well, Gupta was my maiden last name.
Oh, okay.
Gupta was my baby last name.
Gupta.
Dr. Das Gupta. And then I married somebody whose last name was Das Gupta.
Oh, okay.
So I changed. Did I say something else to you about the last name? No, just so I was married at the time but it was still not possible for women to keep their real names. If I was married now, I might have. But the fact is, Gupta is part of my last name. You know, I didn't have too much quarrel with it, even though it's Das Gupta. So I say, if in a very German way, you can say Das Gupta, so the Gupta, you know, it has a very significance. But Gupta is also one of the very famous dynasties.
Right.
The Mauryans, you know, they are also referred to as the you know, the one of the dynasties after them are also called the Gupta dynasty.
Now, were they
So Ashoka and all.
were they more Hindu or what was
All
that?
Hindu. Yeah, the Mauryan dynasty, the Gupta dynasty were all Hindus from North India. You know, but the caste thing, it's so amazing that it goes along with this whole, and India has very strong color prejudice. Very strong.
The name
so-
Sharuta, that's like, oh, you know that name, Sharuta?
No, I don't.
No.
No, because I have an Indian lady that works at my job, and her name is Sharupa.
Sharupa, so
Yeah.
that's her first name.
Yeah.
Oh,
Her
Sharuta.
last name. Her last name is Sharupa.
Oh, sure, oh.
Yeah.
I don't know about that
Yeah.
particular.
All right. Well, so you're talking about, well, we're talking about culture
And
again,
caste.
and caste and all that, and Hinduism sort of lends itself very much to caste because it's broken down in different layers of deities and it's got.
Well, just to say a little bit about Hinduism, you know, Hinduism is not really a religion. And the Hindus never called themselves Hindus. They didn't.
Right.
You know, before the British came. Before the British came, they didn't call themselves Hindus. And the word they used for their way of life was called Sanatan Dharma, which means the eternal way of life. You see? It didn't refer to a religion, but an eternal way of life.
So it's actually more spiritual.
So it's more culture, it's more, but then of course, you know, all these deities got incorporated. And Hinduism really has two parts. One is very philosophical, where you talk about the Upanishads and all those great books, which are extremely, you know, in many ways very scientific, because it says all humans are part of the universal matter, that we are all made of, you know, stardust. We are all made of stardust. So it doesn't really talk about, and Brahma, which is really the universe. Brahma is really the universe, and we are all part of it.
Is it more just like a philosophy?
It is more of a philosophy, that's right. But then their religion that is practiced, I would say the other part of Hinduism is, of course, all the deities. Everybody knows about Ganesha, the elephant god, and Kali, and all of those other gods. And I feel that, you know, that philosophy is so esoteric, so high top, that people don't understand it, and people need something to pattern their lives on. And that's where all these gods and goddesses come. So there are more female goddesses than male gods. Of course, there's a hierarchy. The male gods are at the top.
See, here we go again.
You know, Shiva, you know, the god, who is the destroyer. And then there is, who else? Ganesha, of course.
Isis.
Who is the god who has to be prayed to or remembered or whatever, respected before anybody else. And then there is Krishna and Rama. So there's
Isis.
and Isis. But Isis is more Egyptian.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but it's kind of like, when I learned of Isis, it was like worldwide.
worldwide, yes. And then we have all the goddesses. There is a goddess of learning.
Yes.
She's a goddess of learning, goddess of somebody who is both a goddess of destruction and creation.
Yes.
The whole idea that there can't be creation without
You mean
destruction.
Most of them.
Yeah. It's all the gods and goddesses. So in India there is a saying that there are more gods and goddesses than there are days of the year. Depending on who you talk about.
So was there any back and forth influence in the religion between when people came over, or whatever you would call it? Between people who came over from Africa? Did that influence?
But I'm sure a lot of the honoring the nature or
Right.
honoring of that.
Right.
That probably is a knowledge which is shared by indigenous people all over the world.
Right.
So there is a commonality regardless of where you go, that a way in which nature is held up because people understand the connection and the necessity to reverence nature. That's something you see all over. But so far as give and take is concerned, there are a lot of Muslim saints that Hindus honor. A lot of Muslim poets who reverence Hindu gods and goddesses. So, the wise ones know that it's all part of the same ball game. And of course,
believe in like the sacred cow, eat beef, right? Like the cow, like the cow is sacred.
I'm Catholic.
So do you eat cow?
I eat everything under the sun.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. I converted to Catholicism because of my connection with Georgian Court, which is a Catholic university. I hung out with them for too long. I hung out with them for so long, I said, might as well join them.
Really? That's
Just join them. And they were just so delighted.
We go there every year.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
That's what I thought. So,
And
yeah.
what was your religion before?
I was brought up as a Hindu.
Oh,
My
okay.
mother was a very devout Hindu.
And do you find them compatible in any kind of way? I mean, Catholics have the saints and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah.
I find, one of the things I always like to say is, you don't have to do anything to be a Hindu. You don't have to be baptized, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to be converted. Like in anybody who is born according to this logic is a Hindu because you didn't have to do anything. You just have to be born. But then you can become a Muslim, then you can become a Catholic, then you can become a Sikh. But you don't have to be anything or do anything. You don't have to go to the temple, you don't have to pray, you don't have to do anything. And that's why I really believe that Hinduism is more of a culture than a religion. It is a commonality of values. Values which we all agree on. Respect your elders. That marriage is something that needs to be sanctified because that's the way in which children are raised. That parents owe it to their children because children didn't ask to be born. They are here and it's the parents' responsibility to make sure. And that's why there is this whole emphasis on education, that education, it's parents' responsibility to make sure that kids are educated. So, in my family, we were told that you never put your feet on books. Because books, they are the vessel of all knowledge. So you don't disrespect the book by putting your feet on it. And it would bother me so much when my students would use their stack of books as their footrest. So that gave me a way in which I could tell them, take your feet off your books. And then pick it up and kiss it and tell the book that you're sorry that you disrespected it. But the idea is that's how important knowledge is. So those are values which we all share.
Let me ask you one last thing. Is how women are treated, generally speaking, in India. Is it different over here within the Indian community here? In other words, within the Indian community here, do folks interact a little differently, especially the sexes, than they would if they were back home in India?
Yeah, to a large extent. But, you know, the main principles, if you should talk about that, in how men's roles and women's roles are defined, they really haven't changed that much. And actually what is interesting is some of the same rules which guide the caste system in India are the same rules which determine the relationship between men and women. They were codified by the same guy. His name is Manu, M-A-N-U. You can look it up on your web too, Manu. Manu, he's the guy who codified, you know, the caste, you know, the rules and regulations, and, you know, there are rules of pollution in the sense that if a person of high caste stepped on the shadow of a low caste, he might lose his caste. It's just a bunch of nonsense stuff. Yeah, but very serious. But the same principles, but the same...
The point of which is really to keep them separately. You don't get close enough to...
It's the same thing as segregation or apartheid.
Yeah, that's...
Same thing.
That's
Keep them separated.
Wow.
So the less they know about each other, the more will it be easier for them to hate and be fearful of each other. But so far as India is a very strong patriarchy. Very strong patriarchy where women have a very, I'll say, schizophrenic relationship to society in India, which was determined by the society itself. Our Prime Minister was Indira Gandhi, if you remember, right? And that would make it seem that, oh, the Indian women are so liberated. Total nonsense. Even until I would say even some years ago, Indian women were burned because they didn't provide enough dowry for their wedding.
And then they push them into the fire.
Because again, the relationship...
Accidentally pushed them.
Accidentally.
They accidentally burnt up with all that fabric on.
But you know, dowry was made illegal. Was made illegal in India. But that doesn't stop people from, mainly of course the groom's parents, from demanding. And if the girl's color is as dark as mine, then my father would have to pay an additional dowry.
Why?
To make sure to compensate for my dark color.
Excuse me.
And most Indian women won't deny this, but I just came back from San Francisco and I got to meet a couple of students from Berkeley, and they talk about the Indian activists in Berkeley in California, and they were talking about how there are Indians now, you know, who are extremely Hindu fundamentalists. They will deny everything that I'm telling you. They will say, oh no, we don't have caste. Oh, yeah. Indian women have never had to face such. We honor Indian women. It's again a contradiction. On the one hand, we have women who are successful, who sit in the parliament, who have been ministers.
American history is people that deny.
And then there are women,
slavery,
you know, who have, there are deniers everywhere. I have to say a little bit about Gandhi before we end this, because we can't talk about Africa and India without talking about Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, of course, he's the father of the nation, because he's the one who came back to India in 1919, well, 16? Or around that time, 1670. I'm not particularly sure about the date when he came back, after having lived in South Africa for almost 30 years. His political movement, his political consciousness started in South Africa. And what was the movement that he was trying to mobilize people around? burning the passbooks. Do you know about the passbooks?
Yeah, they ever
How,
had that.
you know,
that's
people of color in South Africa, even though they were almost 85–90% of the population would have to carry on.
Passbook, yeah.
So he was mobilizing people to burn those passbooks. And of course, he was imprisoned
In South Africa.
in South Africa.
Oh, okay, they had a passbook, or to get around.
Oh, so, and he went to South Africa because he was a lawyer. He was first. So, you know, that is an incredible connection. That he honed his political methods there, brought them to India, and helped India become free. And then Dr. King was inspired by that and started the civil rights movement.
The non-violent movement?
The non-violent movement.
Now, Indira Gandhi's bodyguard killed her, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Because-
Why did he kill her again?
because they were Sikhs. They were the ones who wore turbans. And did you see the Golden Temple when Charles
I
showed?
think I did.
Yes.
It's there,
The Golden
right
Temple.
here
I
as
saw it.
well.
This one over there.
This one right here.
Oh, okay.
You know, the Golden
Oh, yeah,
Temple.
Golden Temple, yeah.
The Golden Temple is the holiest site for the Sikhs. Now, it's a very long story, but let me make it as short as I can. There was one guy whose name was Brindanwala. He was also a Sikh. He was fighting for an independent state for the Sikhs. And actually Indira Gandhi had instigated him to draw a rift among the Punjabis, so she could win the election. Her objective was to win the election, but she instigated Brindanwale because she thought that if a lot of people would think like him, she would just squeeze through and win, squeak through and win.
Yeah.
So he went into the Golden Temple for sanctuary when Indira Gandhi won election and changed her mind about him and was going to go after them. So it's important to remember that she encouraged them so she could win the election. But once she won the election, she wanted to put a stop to their fight to start to have a separate state for the Sikhs. And they went into the Golden Temple, and her military burst into the Golden Temple and killed Brindanwale and a lot of the other. So she desecrated our holy space.
So he waited
But she
like
was
a long
Sikh
time.
also.
She was not.
She was not.
She was a Hindu,
Oh,
Brahmin, but she was married to somebody who's called a Parsi. The stories are so
Let me just ask you
Yes,
about this
okay.
gentleman. Ambedkar, he was a contemporary of Gandhi. He was also one of the authors of the Indian
Constitution.
post getting rid of Britain.
Ambedkar was a so-called untouchable,
Right, exactly.
but he got his
He doesn't
law
look like him.
but he got his law degree from Columbia, and around the time when India was becoming independent.
Right.
So Gandhi was chosen to write India's constitution,
Okay,
Ambedkar.
okay.
And so he was, so it's such an irony. And untouchable, writing the Constitution of India, but even though untouchability doesn't continue the way it used to be, caste still plays a very strong role. So, things stay, the more they change, the more they stay the same. So Ambedkar, of course, Gandhi and Ambedkar had a love-hate relationship. Gandhi really encouraged him because Gandhi really tried to do away with untouchability. If there was one movement which was strongest to his heart, was to do away with the caste system. And so he encouraged Ambedkar. But Ambedkar wanted to go even, he really wanted a much more radical society. And Gandhi really didn't agree to it, but that's what we have in many ways today. We have something called affirmative action, just like here.
In India.
But just like here, it was meant to last 50 years, but continues because the changes which were necessary never came about. The schools didn't improve, the communities didn't get the kind of, jobs and, the kind of support which would raise everybody. Exactly, it didn't happen there.
Sounds familiar.
So there is a need to continue with
Okay.
India's affirmative action, as there is a need to continue it over here, since now they are changing. So the connections are very deep
Yeah.
in so many different ways.
All right, folks, anyone have any last comments, questions, because you know what time it is?
Oops.
7:11.
Seven.
The infamous number with the song. No, but it's
I have to
good.
get you all.
Any last comments, questions, anything? Because we're going to close out.
Yes.
So where do you see modern India today, and where do you see India in the future?
Well, if you follow the elections which we just had, the election results in India came out 2 days ago. And the Hindu fundamentalist party won again. And middle class Hindus are very happy with it. And he made a lot of promises the last time he was elected. So it's the same, he's an incumbent prime minister. He's very much for globalization and all of that. So one segment of the country will continue to do well, but 750 million Indians won't.
Wow.
750 million Indians are the ones, because India is we have more than 1 billion people. So the number of people who are in America, it's about 300 million, will probably be all right, will continue to prosper. It's India's 1%. But the other 750 million, pardon?
Has he met with Trump?
Oh, they are buddies.
Oh, we don't like him.
You can say, exactly, they're buddies. But you know what? Obama liked him too.
Yes,
Well, that's one of his
I've
faults.
heard of it.
But to answer your question, it's again a very complex story. One segment of the population will continue to improve, and that's the one everybody will see. The shopping malls, the huge buildings in which the max mansions where people live. But for the common people, they don't matter. They don't matter, like everywhere else. The majority of the people of a country don't matter. They are invisible to the power brokers and the rich who support them. So whatever future you see for the world is the same future that we have in India. But with global, with climate crisis and all of that affecting India much more than anywhere else. Andaman Nicobar, can you imagine where they are going to be with the rising waters?
Yeah, sure.
That's New York City.
Yeah.
So there's so much.
That was good.
Wow, that's
Thank you.